Good morning. So, another week starts, and I hope you had a great weekend. I had a few thoughts during the weekend, and in particular this morning, around Agile coaches in total. So, we have, I have a version of an Agile coach implemented in our company, and that's me. But the thing is, this role had a certain scope where we aligned on and said, he's talking to teams, team leads, figures out what could be a next step in their agile journey. But at the same time, I think it had always the idea, what you could call governance role. I would say it's more a conceptual role. Where you say these are the concepts which seem to be fitting to our organization, and as such need to be driven forward. In particular, if you have areas which are, say, not agile yet, or are not apprehensive or understanding or even confronted with the knowledge or the opportunities around an agile framework and the agile ways of working. So this kind of more, I would say, not governance, but educational bit. So, I mean, to me, it sounds so good if you're having a person who's accepted maybe to a certain degree in the company or knows the company to a certain extent, and then you take this person in as the mentor and coach for people who are doing already Scrum Master and other agile roles, and at the same time you're maybe bringing to those areas which have little knowledge or experience or exposure a bit more knowledge. A self-organizing organization, and that starts of course with the staff, but also with the allowance for the staff to do so. And even if they are not self-organizing, they are usually in a situation where you could say, if you are really thoroughly thinking about your way of working and what you could improve on, I'm pretty sure given the right environment, these people would naturally evolve into a way of agile working. Yeah, so now people will scream and say, no, not in enterprise, it's not in my company, whatever. And I think you're right that certain things will never change. But it's because there are structures and people around to make sure the current way of thinking and the current structure is maintained. We have in an agile, our agile mindset usually tells us, or what we know about it, what we have experienced as agile coaches or people who have been working in an agile way for quite some time, we have a big assumption, a hypothesis, and we say it's not only, and there's a difference maybe between 20 years ago and today. 20 years ago, we said in a fast-paced world where the requirements are changing over time, there is a certain risk that if you're doing a big plan up front, that 1-2 years down the line, this big plan will face reality and won't have adopted properly to the changed reality, and as such is maybe outdated. So that is sort of against big projects versus agile implementations. But then there was the other thought where you could say, yeah, and in total, an organization needs to adopt to their environment, and the environment is changing. Not for all companies by far, this was really true. Yeah, so for instance, I remember 10 years back we discussed more technology change or disruptive innovations. And people said, okay, this is our changing environment. To a certain degree, this is what brings the change along. And I'm not sure whether I'm too old or whether the media is doing their job really well on, let's say, dramatizing certain things. And I'm not saying they are not bad things, but I feel we are getting dramatized when you read about. See, we had 4 years the Twitter messages of Donald Trump on the top lines of German newspapers. And as soon as that was gone, we had a replacement, which was Corona. And now we have the Ukraine war. And even if we don't have this, or we definitely have summer in Germany right now, and definitely we have a series of drought reports where people say, and this is where your water level in the ground is decreasing, and this is where the rivers are decreasing, and this is where the trees are burning, and so on and so forth. And it's all bad. Yes, of course it is. But fucking hell, if we're keeping our panic level with every of these subjects at level 10, what is level 11 then? How do I distinguish between a level 10, Trump is silly, stupid, an asshole, whatever these newspapers articles said or people said about him? Yeah, it was bad, and it's the president of the United States, and he has the opportunity to press the button and whatever, these sort of extreme scenarios people painted. I mean, he did really extreme stuff, but nothing of those extremes. And then secondly, yes, the drought is a big problem. Is this now a bigger problem than Trump, or is Corona a bigger problem than the drought? And I think for all these things, there is one very important element. There's very little we can do about it. If Trump is elected, Trump is elected. If Corona is there, Corona is there. Yes, we can take different measures, but the doom and gloom I've seen in the media for the last 10, 15 years has been almost heartbreaking. Yeah, and it's not me saying that now only, but I've spoken to very senior managers who are way older than I am even, and reading newspapers and telling me I can't read this stuff any longer. Yeah, and there is a difference between a senior manager and a normal staff member in the regard of if you have multiple people reporting against you, they have to share certain private life things. Yeah, so for instance, if your mother dies, you don't necessarily change that with all of your colleagues at the same time. You might be that kind of person. Or if you're getting divorced and you're going through a rough time. The one person you usually tell it to is your line manager, because he is the one who's giving you sick leave, or how's it called? There's a phrase in English where you get compassionate leave. Yeah, so you get these kinds of flexibility from your line manager, but you need to tell him a little bit about it, at least so much that he is aware that this matter you're dealing with is serious enough for him to be flexible on your leave, for instance. So then what I'm trying to say is these people are a little bit more used to get bad messages, because if you're, like I did once, have 30 people you're responsible for, then you will get a little bit more insight into their private life and a little bit more also of these drama things. So you have to deal with drama in your own life, and then with the drama of more or less the really big drama of 30 people. Yeah. Luckily, 90% of the 30 people are not in a heavy drama. Otherwise, you would be dealing with crisis too much. So why am I all saying this is the world in Agile, which has been 10 years ago adopted to disruptive technologies and innovative technologies, was maybe a good reason to say we need to be able to do this. But if you're, say, a car manufacturing company, you wonder what disruptive technology would come along which impacts my business case. And yes, Elon Musk was back then also on the radar, but even today, even though he is very successful, our big companies have just, let's say, added electricity on top. And I would say from the outside, when I look at the margins and the EBIT, so the incomes and profits of those big car companies, this wasn't disruptive enough. And these are really big companies, and they have really slowly reacted. Yeah, it took them at least 10 years to realize that there is a serious threat coming from the electronic vehicles and that they have to do something about it. But that's not agile. This is not disruptive. This is not this moment. It is rather the moment where you are having 3,650 days or even more to react. So, but what did definitely happen is that Corona came along, that Fukushima came along, and we had a financial crisis, and, well, Trump, I don't know, probably not, didn't change that much, but Corona had a vast impact to our home office situation. Yeah, as simple as it sounds, but this little thing, this little change towards home office, this was a change everyone could feel who was working from home, or who was in the office and wasn't working from home. You could see it on the streets, you could see it in the office, you can see it at how parents were able to take their responsibility into their own hands, or maybe not. We saw Corona in the hospitals. Our perception for, let's say, the whole health situation in our country got completely different. We suddenly knew things we never have looked in before. The amount of emergency beds and the amounts of people and the amounts of overhours they're doing and how they're getting paid. And yeah, so there were complete television shows on the payment system within German health caretakers and stuff like this. So, and it has changed underneath. We have not only Corona, but also we started to see a change in, let's say, the commodity markets, which nobody would realize maybe from a normal household perspective, until the point where the invoice or the bill for power and gas increased by 100%. And this is quite threatening to our social system, which was already a little bit under pressure due to Corona. Yeah, very important crisis. I forgot to mention how people were impacted by the Syrian war. How in Germany in 2015, 1 million people arrived, and all these discussions around this particular thing. And then Ukraine, the war there. So we have a lot of things who are impacting the daily life of us as human beings. And what does it change? I mean, what does change if you suddenly get a really, really high bill? Yeah, so our fuel stations, really, really high bills. Suddenly, I can see newspaper articles around how companies try to save energy by saying, we send people home and we keep just one level in our office heated for those people who have to be there. I can see similar ideas for other parts of the businesses, and it's quite interesting that as soon as it hits, let's say, the private money, people start thinking about how to save money, and as such save energy, and as such maybe save the planet. I know I'm talking a little bit around the the houses. I'm not going straight to the subject matter, but what I'm trying to say in the last maybe 10 minutes is the world is changing not only with disruptive technology or innovative technology, and as such is then imposing change to companies. It is these days far more things which are seemingly having a drastic impact on commodity prices, on supply chains, on availability of certain goods, and this forces companies into thinking differently than before. Another example, which is a little bit more disruptive technology-like, but nevertheless, now I spoke about Tesla before. So the big car companies have now, after 3,650 days, understood that they have to change something, and they're starting to change things. And now they realize their software development becomes such a big thing for them. Yeah, so whilst, let's say in former times, car industries were about engineering intelligence when it comes to how you bend metal and how good your engine is, and the interior quality stays, bending metal stays, the engine is gone. Yeah, so you now have in the ecosystem a very big part, which is information technology, because suddenly some people say electric vehicles are computers on wheels. Maybe they are, but it's where of course the big companies are struggling now, because they might do it for the first time. They might do it for the first time in that area. At least Volkswagen seems to struggle a bit, and it's interesting to see how they now learn how this works, and I'm pretty sure it is quite a different type of software development sometimes than it is for the kinds of software development we do in enterprises. If it's just a support job for, let's say, how you sell clothes, I mean a clothing shop or a discounter, supermarket, they're all using information technology, but it's sort of a tool to get the real job done. I think for the car company it's a bit different. On the one hand, everything is a bit more or less security related, so you need to ensure that whatever you're building doesn't stop the brakes from working or sort of imposes danger to the drivers, but or passengers, but you have to also develop different kinds of software, and it's sort of becomes the heart of what. Yes, driving is the heart, but if software is the driving, then software becomes the heart of a car. All these changes are eventually so obvious that, at least for most of us, it becomes, I think, a very obvious thing that we have to be able to adopt to this change. And we could also say we have seen that change is coming along, and that it's probably coming along again. And then we have to build structures or ensure that certain structures do not exist and others do exist, which are facilitating the change which is coming along, which is really hard to foresee how the change looks like, but it should be possible overall. And I think this is where a little bit, at least in the industry I'm right now, and came a little bit of a different thinking. You know, when you have Aldi as a supermarket discounter, they have the absolute certainty that people will eat meat tomorrow, will eat milk tomorrow, eggs and wheat. Yeah, let's go just for the vegan stuff. Yeah, so wheat, bread. These are things which will still be eaten tomorrow, as well as vegetables and stuff. So this is certainty which doesn't go away. What is, on the other hand, a little bit unsure for them, and that's new, that came with Corona, is how people are buying these goods. In former times, it was pretty stable. due to Corona and the Ukraine war, we had two occasions where the people were buying much more toilet paper and wheat. That was the same for both Corona and the Ukrainian war. And for Ukraine, we also had additionally oil, sunflower oil. So this change was so drastic that all the supply chain wasn't able to cope with the sudden demand which was coming up there. And we had shops where it took weeks or almost a month until they had restocked properly again. You had others who were then looking for alternative options and sort of got an extra delivery. I'm pretty sure the systems, the IT systems behind it were a little bit overwhelmed by that sudden change, and that it wasn't that easy from a pure administrative background perspective to properly describe this extraordinary increase on the one hand, and also the measures then which were taken against it, like ordering often or finding a completely new supplier who's then giving you for a very temporary period, not just not for months or years, how it's usually done, but really just maybe one-off extra toilet paper. So this is what this branch has learned, yes, the supermarkets, that there is unfortunately the certainty that goods are available. Yeah, we had also the Panama Canal where this big ship was blocking the canal, and that had influence. Then we have also, of course, in the whole worldwide supply chain of problems since Corona. So there's so many things which are directly influencing our supermarkets and their availability due to supply chain problems and to, let's say, different purchase behavior. So yeah, I think this is where change is coming in, and the change has always impact to the more or less whole organization. So when I say human beings or adults who are working in a company might come to the same conclusion and to one form of agile behavior, it could be because we are seeing these random changes coming along. And then we are realizing that we have to keep our processes and ways of working in a state in which they are able to deal with more or less random change. And if my hypothesis is right, all these changes around us, of course, also open the door for agile entry. Because if we're able to explain properly that agile is helping you on reacting to external change, then of course we could also use all these examples that I've been just using in order to make people understand that agile is not a threat, slightly different way of working, yes, different mindset, yes, but at the end of the day, in the primary case, in the first instance, a way to help the company and individuals, teams in there to adopt to change in a way that is productive and efficient, and also that change isn't perceived always as something really bad. Because if my IT systems say, if I want a new supplier in my company, and if my processes say, that takes you 6 weeks to do, because you have to get the new supplier, make credit risk analysis, you have to do data security and data protection things, because you maybe exchange information, then your accounting systems, you have to enter a new company, and you have to, maybe for the first time in your life of this company, or like in the old days, provide non-electronic invoice to these people, because they and that you have incompatible, and maybe they don't even have an IT system, so you have to somehow cooperate again. So you can, of course, big companies are used to sort of dictate to their suppliers how their IT systems need to interact with theirs. If you're in an emergency situation, you might not be able to do this with your new company. And I'm pretty sure this required some heavy lifting on the administrative side of some of these supermarkets. But if you are seeing that this is a potential option also for the future, then you will start to change these processes. And this is where change is good, but at the beginning it's shit. And an agile way of thinking would actually say there's a challenge there, but there we have means to adopt. And we have also an inner mindset that change as such is taken for granted. All right. Why is Agile Coach then an anti-pattern? I mean, this was how I started the whole thing. An Agile Coach says that, I would say from the outside, and he's not a person, but the position as such sends a message and says there is a need to have such a person in this company, because otherwise this company might not go agile, might not go to the right direction. They need a kindergarten person, a teacher in there in order to get agile. And I think the Agile Coach always is maybe temporarily needed at the very beginning to give the first prod into the agile direction, but then it should actually disappear. And that makes me think in hindsight about my position I'm having right now in this company, that this might need to end very soon, because otherwise you could almost say I'm a reason for people not thinking themselves about change, because they have this person, he does it for them, and I think that doesn't help. So the fact I'm there is almost saying, if I'm there, it's enough. No one else has to do something. So, and I mean not me personally, but really just the role. So from that angle, let's see. But I think an Agile Coach is better done in an external role, because these people are by default temporary nature. Even if they're there for 3 years, everybody knows they're gone after some time, and that makes them always think about the transitional period to say, okay, we have had external push. How do we ensure that once they are gone, we still have a way of dealing with whatever they did before that we're continuing. So this is it. This is it for today. I wish you all the best for the current week. Don't read too many newspapers, and